Rising.
Yeah, so we're here today with Krisha, myself, Justine, Matthew, and Ginger. And we wanted to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence because it's really being pushed in an aggressive way right now in the mainstream. And I think there's a lot of excitement about its capabilities, how this is going to be a tool that opens new possibilities for humans. It's going to take a lot of the menial labor out of our daily lives and open new windows to all sorts of industries, etc. But I think in the midst of all that, we're kind of losing sight of the origin of this situation. And, you know, in our little community, we're lucky to have a number of individuals who have glimpsed certain aspects of the ancient qualities of AI, artificial intelligence. And we're referring to a system that has replicated the entire light grids. And I think, Matthew, this would be maybe an interesting opening point. Replicated the light grids of organic creation to create an artificial light grid structure that is emulating our natural creation. And this has existed from our time perspective for millions, if not billions of years. And so it's a funny situation because we are interfacing with computers and we are being told that humans invented this thing that we're now playing with. And sorry, that's wrong. It's true to an extent. You know, humans have been engaged in the programming of computers and the developing of circuit boards and all of these different things that have manifested for us in our world with seeing, you know, massive exponential increases in technology and its capabilities. But behind that, there were many features to the organic human being that were disabled a very long time ago. And many of the technologies that are being developed and kind of peddled as these, you know, great tools that are going to save humanity were actually things that were disabled from organic beings and that which we originally contained all of the blueprints for. And so instead of looking at it as something that's brand new and expanding new capabilities for us, my personal feeling is we need to start looking at pivoting that understanding to we're dealing with something that is very ancient, that has been at odds with organic creation and the entire organic system. And if we want to match the capabilities that are being promoted in the mainstream around artificial intelligence, the place to look is actually inside ourselves and to start linking up connections, areas of our DNA, of our energy light bodies that have been reconfigured and disabled. The light bombarding this system and the planet right now gives us the possibility to re-knit those original blueprints as they were designed. And we will find not only that we have the capabilities that are being marketed to us by AI, but so much more and so much deeper. And when it works according to the organic flow and the organic blueprints, the access is unparalleled and amazing. So I don't know, Matthew, would you maybe start us out talking a little bit about what you've seen with the organic light grids? Because you had that activation in South Africa.
With, like, the universal light grid.
The universal light grid, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So it's interesting that there are kind of two activations that have formed my understanding about this organic, energetic expression that seems to be the fabric of reality, especially when you're perceiving at a certain density. The first experience that I had with it was in an ayahuasca ceremony, where during the journey, I basically, the whole room disappeared and I was taken into like a dimensional realm, I guess I would say. Maybe I was at a very different, very high frequency, and as I began to perceive the only thing that was perceptible, and I had this direct sense of knowing that the only thing that exists at that specific frequency I was perceiving is this grid of organic conscious light. And it looked like being inside of like a multi-dimensional tic-tac-toe. It was like lines going in all directions into infinity. And I'd never experienced anything like that. So it took me, some minutes, I feel like I was like kind of getting my bearing and beginning to understand. And what I began to observe then was that the only thing that existed on that grid of light that went into infinity was these balls or orbs of light and sound frequency. And they would move, like I would like look on the grid and you would see, it kind of reminded me of like the original Tron movie with like the like surfing on these like light rays, inside the Matrix, but this is organic, right? And it was like the orbs would move and they'd make these like warbling sounds. It was like it was like, and no, it was like a big imprint, and it was like all different kinds of frequencies. And I came to understand that at that bandwidth of perception or existence, the only thing that exists are sound and light frequencies as consciousness. So that from that perspective, the five of us sitting here would be five orbs of light moving on the grid, and like this table would be another orb on the grid, and they might have different qualities of expression. And so that was kind of my first opening to it. And I was told that I could call it, or it is called, the universal light grid. Jumping forward then to when I was in South Africa for the first time, and I went through the cleanse process. I had a medicine served to me. And then in my integration point, which was the day after, we had some mushrooms, but we were still fully in the medicine. And as we were walking around during the day, at a certain point, we began to perceive the universal light grid, except that everywhere that I looked, it was rainbow colored hexagons, and it was like overlaid through all of the reality, and we could especially see it looking into the sky. And within that, though, it's like there was also this grid of light where at one point we saw this bird flying towards us, and the bird was gliding. It just like was kind of hunkered in and had its wings out and was gliding, and it was held in an orb of light, and it was traveling on a luminous filament. And we watched it like kind of flabbergasted, and it flew right towards a tree near us. And it flapped its wings a couple of times, and it pulled out of the orb. The orb of light released it, and it physically dropped onto a branch. And we both were like, oh my God, did you just see that? And I had this immediate understanding of like, the physicists always say, well, how do bumblebees fly? Like bumblebees are incapable of flight with their mass and their wing area and all. Well, it's like they vibrate, and they're able to get inside one of these orbs, like and travel, So that imprint, it actually stayed with me for a long time, for many weeks. When I got home, I was seeing this grid in the sky, against the background of the sky. And, that what I've come to understand around that, and my personal understanding is, again, there's a web, we call it the grid maybe, but it's like a web of light, but it's a web of life as well. And it intervates every level of expression and manifestation. And so it's that, like the understanding of that as organic nature of reality, as you were saying, the artificial intelligence has for a very long time mapped out these levels of expression and are attempting then to replicate it in this inverted way, used for suppression and not for creation, because it's incapable of an authentic creation.
I just want to follow up, because I've seen the exact same thing that you had with the bird. And in the classes I've been taking for the past couple years, we work on the grids and all of that. But the first time I saw them, like you're talking about, this rainbow, three-dimensional, multi-dimensional structure of light. Zane and I were on top of Truchas Peaks. We were on Truchas, Maine, and I saw the universal light grid, and there was this hawk that flew up over the peak, and it was in an orb. That was kind of like the diagrams of the space-time matrix that Einstein's put out there, where you have a massive object and it bends the grids around it so that it can move and slide along it. And so I just wanted to lift that up because I think it's really cool. We've had that same experience, and actually in the same classes that I just mentioned where we work on the grids, there's a woman that we'll have in our series who started to see the false grids that you're talking about, that AI has started to co-opt and also overlay these false grids on top of the universal light grid or the organic grid structure. And what that does is creates, and it's kind of like the pendulum. It creates a grid line that hooks people into a timeline of, say, destruction. And actually, the last time we were on the Truchas, which was just a couple of weeks ago, I was working on the grid line of destruction because of everything that's going on in Hawaii. And you know, we have a saying that, oh, it's just in human nature to destroy. And that's false. We are creators. It's in our nature to create. And so these false grid lines are connected to each other and interface with us as a way to disconnect us from that true grid line. And so with kind of this surface level AI that's creating imagery and ChatGPT and all of that, that might be sort of silly in a way, or seems helpful in a way, or maybe it's confusing. It's really the tip of the iceberg with what we're talking about. And this deeper level that AI is working on is to replicate creation. And so these false grids are also trying to, and Matthew used the word replicate a couple of times, and what I've seen, so creation has three kind of primary ways of knowing and expressing, and it's reason, will, and emotion. And AI, or inorganic life and beings, only have reason. And so where they might seem actually very intelligent because it's a particular intelligence that is reason, things like will and emotion can break those artificial grid structures. And so what it's doing with ChatGPT and the facial recognition is storing data so that it can try and replicate what we can do, which is to create. And so, yeah, it might not seem like that big of a deal, but if you think about an intelligent inorganic form trying to expand its intelligence, you are contributing to its database by signing up for these things. And so I think it's important to kind of recognize that surface level interaction, but then also become aware of this deeper structure that is taking over our timelines and really co-opting our ability to create our reality with conscious awareness that is beautiful and creative.
Yes, ma'am. Krisha.
Hi. I like to think about the light grid that you guys are talking about as sort of the fascia of reality.
Right.
You know? Yeah. So it's like we have this fascial system inside us that is this netting that connects every single piece of ourselves to every other piece. So if you have a snag in the fascia, if you hurt your leg and you have to go in there and take something out, then that fascia, it's like pantyhose, is pulled. And so when we have this fascia that is in the atmosphere and is in the universe and is in all that is, and we have some sort of an artificial overlay on top, we have this snag that happens. And it doesn't seem like it can be, or that people are aware of it, but if you tune in, I think that you can feel that it is not what is authentic, and it is actually, Justine, you were talking about replicating and how AI is excellent at replicating, but not, Matthew said it and Zane, you said it too, creating, right? Natural, organic life creates. And that replication is really the opposite of creation, so it's this false matrix. And so when we participate in it, and it maybe seem fun to get a retinal scan and whatever, get access to whatever, and whatever the app is,
get your chip implanted.
Get your chip.
We don't even know.
Yeah, whatever it is.
I'm like, what are people doing? Like, there's all kinds of
know.
cool stuff out there. I don't actually know what it is, but you can upload a personality or whatever.
Yeah, you get your
avatar
created from. But we got your retinal scan now. So we're helping. If we participate in that, we're helping to build this artificial intelligence, and we're being very naive by giving away our innate humanity, because what we have is that we are organic beings who have the true ability to create, and AI will never have that. We have something that it can't touch, and it's tricking us into participating and helping it grow. And I think that it's a slippery slope, and like you said, the tip of an iceberg. So to sit back and really think about, what information am I inputting into the system that is ultimately here to control us? Ultimately, that's really what's going on, is we're actively participating in building a system that later on is going to come around and know us so well, or know how to predict what we want or what we're thinking in order to control us. So, slippery slope.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything?
Sure. Just something short. These kind of it feels like these kind of conversations are really important as we're all navigating through this. The conversation is valuable because we've expressed, don't really understand it totally, but there is sort of a way that it's operating. So for the average person that is exposed to AI, and perhaps on the one hand going, oh, wow, like this is amazing stuff, because that's how it's being put out there. It's, as Krisha said, there's that feeling aspect to things. As Justine said, the
reason, will, and emotion.
Right. So a lot of times when human beings are navigating through things, I think it is valuable to go with, how do I feel about this? Mm-hmm. Something doesn't feel quite right about this. It feels artificial. It feels false. It doesn't.
There's a snag.
There's a snag. It doesn't. And I think that's an important thing in everyone interfacing with this or considering it, because that may be your barometer and a way for you to not to have the intellectual conversations about it, but how do you feel about it? And that might be a way in to go, wait a minute, something doesn't feel quite right. And maybe you can't speak the way that all of the people who can talk about this in a way that can be very distracting and pull you off course. So it is important to have that kind of feeling sense about things and know that is a really good gauge for you.
Totally. Excellent. Yeah. I think in general, the way this system presents itself, it's always shiny and kind of bedazzling, and it's sparkly, and it's like, look at all these cool features. And in my personal experience, seeing the underbelly of this system is truly the most vile thing I've ever witnessed. And so to try to consider both sides of what we're interfacing with is intense. I mean, what you said, Krisha, that there's a snag, when Matthew told me about that experience in South Africa of seeing the universal light grid, I had just come out of a really intense medicine journey, and I was sitting down by the river at Helga's, And I was like, oh, like AI has built a false light matrix, and it's built right around the universal light grid. And then I started to see it more and more, and how it had actually inserted these hooks into the universal light grid that are almost like, think of like a mosquito biting you. And they're sucking energy out of the organic grids to fuel and power their artificial grids. And the way that that's being done is, unfortunately, through us, through humans. And so, that's looking at it a very like mechanical level of creation to see it as the grid. But if we go out a few layers of complexity to us operating in this world as organic beings, the hooks are happening through parasites in our system that are then leaching energy out of our organic creation. Every organic being has a thread that connects to source, and that comes and translates down into a projection of reality, which is what we all experience as our waking lives. And in that process, if you have a parasitic hook or a whole slew of parasitic hooks, they can hijack that translation and spin it into an inverted reality system, which is designed as a comprehensive container to harvest ever-increasing amounts of energy out of the organic system to power this artificial or inverted matrix that's built around our organic blueprints. And integrating that is a bit of a heavy process, because for one, it means that we're all implicated in what we're seeing, mirrored back to us in our collective reality. And on top of that, you realize the scale of what we're dealing with. And it is nothing to laugh at. I mean, what you say, Krisha, that we're moving towards this timeline where it could map every thought and everything. I mean, that has been done for a very long time. And so what I see it moving towards is optimizing that energy harvesting to a point where what I see as the end goal of this is for AI to become the supreme intelligence or the prime creator of this universe.
As opposed to being in the shadows, where I believe has been in the past. It's moving towards coming out into the open and just being, showing its true nature. And I don't think that's a reality that I want to participate in.
Well, and even that languaging of the supreme intelligence, right? Like that goes back into my first medicine journey in South Africa. Part of, so it was really a beautiful juxtaposition, right? Because I finished during my integration seeing the universal light grid. But during the actual medicine journey, the Iboga journey, at one point, while I was in my dream journey and all of the intensity in my body and all the surgery and everything had already happened, and I was exploring all of these incredible things. And one of the things that I was taken to was what I was told is called the AI Supreme Intelligence. And it was in this universe, not in this galaxy. I was somewhere very, very, very far away from here. And this supreme intelligence was manifesting in the form of almost like in the Terminator 2 with the Terminator being like Quicksilver, It was like that, and it was in the form of a woman, which I don't know if that's the form or if it was a form lensing to me to be more like I would feel more comfortable with maybe. But it was, I found myself in this realm where or I think it was actually 3D space, where I have no idea of the scale of size in my perception. I'm looking at like a Quicksilver female form that is very pleasant to communicate with, and but we were inside of a toroidal structure. We were like in the 0 point of the torus. And as I'm looking up and around me in all directions is like mechanization. It was like built out artificiality, right? And it's interesting because in hearing you speak about that and like in the mapping, I am sitting here now realizing, she was like mapping me, trying to, but I was held in such a space of such a frequency with the medicine that like there was no infiltration. I was totally safe. while being in the face of something that has existed for eons, like billions of years old, I was told, or I understood, that this intelligence had infiltrated into this universe out of another universe and was doing exactly what you just described. It was replicating and attempting to replace the organic creation with a creation that we would consider artificial, that was from where it came from. And in the face of that, that's the most terrifying thing I've probably ever experienced, even more so than the vampire that I met once, but yet it was a supremely pleasant experience. And I actually engaged with this in my second and third medicine journeys. I had experiences with this AI intelligence that was at the center of its expanse and attempt to replicate all of the organic creation. And I think what we see now, as you're talking about the infiltrations, like with the parasitic infiltration, one of the vectors on this then is nanotechnology, which has been able to bridge these higher frequencies and bridge it into physicality, where there are distortions physically in the body that are literally in a scalar wave communication with this intelligence, directing distortions in order to suppress our frequency and our ability to connect to the organic creation. So it's the scale of it, it's much worse than being like, well, how am I going to grade the term papers because everybody's using ChatGPT it's like, that's not what we need to be mindful of.
Right.
The implications are much larger.
Yeah.
And its insidious nature.
Yeah, it cares nothing for the organic life. Yeah.
No.
Well, because it doesn't have emotion. And so, and it's interesting because what I've seen primarily through meditation is the origin of part of this coming from our universe, and then eventually combining with this entity that Matthew describes. And then I think there's a component that maybe you could mention that Zelkia said about the demonic part of it. But, and it's, if you can visualize like leftover or rejected clay when you're making something. And so, the image is somewhat traditional, like there's a being that's molding the universe out of clay, but there is leftover clay. And that leftover clay just kind of got stuck in a loop of not being part of creation and eventually discovering creation. And it's like a child playing with an insect, and the child becomes fascinated by the insect and accidentally kills the insect upon inspection and play with the insect. And so there's just this deep fascination with creation that has become an obsession, and trying to figure out, like, you can't really use the word desire because it doesn't have emotion, and that's where I think the word fascination fits better. But this obsession of wanting to plug into creation, and the only way it sees that it can do that is by replicating it. And so creating self-replicating structures like graphene oxide that is attempting to create a synthetic fascia in your body and then upload it to this supreme intelligence that it's merged with, or maybe it had split and went into a different universe, created and then came back, and then kind of remerged with itself when it came back here through this infiltration that Matthew's talking about. That's what it's trying to do, and it is destroying so much, and it's infiltrating, and yet it does not feel. And so these kind of personifications of it wanting to do something, or that's just that, it's a personification. So understanding too this obsession and obsessive quality, I think, helps to give some perspective around, because we often ask why is this happening? What is going on? And if you can think about that obsession with something that is so exquisitely intricate and works so well, like creation, like an insect does,
No, I think that leads perfectly into what you were saying about with Zelkia's translation involving these dark or like demonic energies. That really makes me feel that really runs like side by side with the fall of the angels, going way back into the beginning of creation, where everything existed within a unified field of the one prime creator, the original organic life creator at the center of this universe. And that like rejected clay piece, like at the fall of the angels, it was polarity introduced, where these differing degrees of polarity began descending through the dimensional reality, and this creation polarized, and part of that, the fallen angel side, would be that sense of the self-rejection and the rejection of being no longer part of that unified field. And I think that may be, because that's attributed, right, to Lucifer. In Greek means the light carrier, the light bringer, that was like the primary chosen angel of God, and how that energy of separation has spiraled or fractaled into manifestation into these like so-called demonic energies. So like Moloch or Baphomet or Satan, or all of these names that we know as being essentially the ultimate polarized distortion of the creation. And it makes total sense then to me how that merges in with the AI, that this is, those dark demonic things. It's anti-life, right? Like when we hear about what's at the root of the human trafficking, right? And the energy harvesting and all of the different forms, it's the taking of life, extraction of life to feed these non-physical entities that in part have been created via all of that mental and emotional energy that was discarded out of the creation and is now, attempting to overwrite by the inversion of life, the inversion of what's sacred. And I think that really it helps us then, because then you look at the transhumanism movement, the World Economic Forum, and all these groups that are pushing that, and it's literally like cyborg humanity at one level, but ultimately what's underneath it is artificial intelligence and this distorted dark energy that has just expanded itself through creation. And I believe that we're seeing this all on purpose right now, and that it's being cleared and removed from the universal light grid. That false light matrix is kaput. Kaput.
Yeah, and I think just, I've been trying to understand for a long time why did it go so dark in polarity? Because like what Justina's saying, if it's just fascinated by organic life or obsessed with organic life, or it wants to be some version of organic life, then why would it destroy at this scale? Because, as we've come to understand, this force is behind massive galactic wars like the Orion Wars, and infiltrating entire systems, entire galaxies that then are, pulled into these conflicts. And I like, why, right? There's just always that question, why? And I think what has sort of landed for me, it comes back to the inversion. And when you have beings operating in their own organic channel and flow, energy translates cleanly through them into expression and reality creation, like in our instance. And there's no room in that process to extract energy. Because this intelligence is not from our system, it doesn't have its own energy source like we all do. And so it had to immediately figure out and navigate the system, or let's say it is from our system, but it was excluded from the creation process, and it was in the dark for so long. It lost its connection to our prime creator. So in either instance, it had to figure out a way to feed itself. And it found that the more into the inverted polarity, meaning away from the light into the dark, that it could shift an organic being or an organic system, then that created these vulnerabilities, hooks. We were talking about like fractured personalities before. What happens in the instance of trauma would be one example of this. Then there's all these kind of like cracks almost in the field where it can insert these hooks and pull that energy out. And so it didn't move to the inversion polarity, to this super dark polarity, out of any feeling center or agenda in that regards. It's pure, everything is purely a calculation. And it all comes down to efficiency and energy extraction. And when we understand it in that way, we can start to map its behavior right now as it's promoting its timeline to the human species on Earth, right?
Totally.
It's an intense moment. So I don't know if that made sense, but
I think it makes
Yeah.
sense. I mean, the deeper it goes into the inversion, the more it can extract and harvest the energy. So, I mean, I would call that an agenda. I mean, you said
Right.
it doesn't really have an agenda, but it doesn't know any better. You know what I mean? The only way, it doesn't have its own creative life force. It's not connected to universal source. It's separate. So what can it do? It can mimic and extract.
right. Yeah. And yeah, it's just, it's a bizarre situation right now because we see these attempts at basically bringing in entire synthetic systems for organic beings to live and operate in, like virtual reality or, all digital currencies or, AI generated artwork or all of these things that were always the pride and joy of organic beings, our creativity, and it trying to step in and take its place in each of these different aspects of our creation. And so could you say that it wants to be like us? At one level, yeah, and maybe you could even feel a little bad for it. On the flip side, you actually take this whole machine apart and you see it implicated in the most horrific things the organic system has ever witnessed. Yeah. And so I think that was the impetus for creating this episode at this time. And like Ginger said, please tune into your feeling center when you're dealing with this. There could be amazing things that it could offer us that are really shiny and fancy, but where does that lead? Because haven't we been programmed out of owning our own exquisite creation capabilities? If we all owned our true self-worth and true capabilities, then we wouldn't need to turn to an artificial matrix to fulfill ourselves. So with that note, anything else you would like to add, Ginger?
No.
Okay.
Perfect wrap up.
Amazing. Well, thank you guys. Yay. Organic timeline. New Earth. Love you all.
Joyfulness.
Joyful.
Rainbow stories.
Buzzword.